Welcome to another episode of GGA. What is that? Good Game Alert. Good Game Alert is when you come get the latest information on the streets, on the system, and we bring relevant folks into the space with relevant content. So with no further ado, we have a wonderful guest this evening by the name of David Heppard. I've been knowing David for about 20 plus so years. I want to get into a little bit about his story, but before we go there, I want to introduce you, a warm introduction. David Heppard, formerly known as No Brains. Just being honest, you are now the executive director of Freedom Project, doing a lot of wonderful, fantastic work. We'll get into that a little later on in the show as well. And also the things that you're providing in terms of services, resources, and most of all, relevant relationships. So just to get a little bit about yourself, can you give us a little bit of backdrop about who David Heppard is? But before you get into a little more who you are currently, give us a glimpse of who you were prior to being the executive director of Freedom Project. Give us a little glimpse into the life of AKA No Brains.
Right. Thank you, sir. That's my guy. Well, you know a large part of that because we grew up together in adverse circumstances, being the belly of the beast, right? But so originally I'm from Tacoma, and I was affiliated and engulfed in gang culture, and that's probably the only environment where you can be called no brains, and that's taken as a compliment, right? And that's what it was. I think the honest part of that is I was in my trauma. You know, I grew up in abuse and neglect, and I dealt with the circumstances I had to deal with. And my solution, my strategy was to find love and acceptance in the only place that I can find it. And that was, cats from the block, right? We shared the same trauma. We shared the same troubled past. We had the same issues. And so there was something about the camaraderie that really allowed for me to show up differently because I had something that I was missing. And now you can have a conversation to talk about how flawed it was and how it had me moving in a way where the streets call me no brains, right? And it was, but I don't want people to forget that piece. Like I was a child, right? I was a child who needed acceptance and who needed love. And I found that in the block. And granted that some of the things that I had to do to keep that was illegal and was violent, but those were the circumstances. Those were circumstances where no brains is possible,
So you mentioned that things were missing. Yeah. What are some of the things that were missing that created someone to show up or to formalize a no brains? What was missing?
Well, I think there was a survey that was done or a study and was talking about how kids fear being ostracized worse than death, right? So I never want to minimize that acceptance piece, right? Ethnically, I'm half Black and Korean, right? Now, you can imagine as a child that what type of pushback I might have got, right? My mom got disowned and for marrying my dad. And so I never really had a relationship with that side of the family and with that community. And in the Black community, I was different. And being different isn't a good thing when you're young. When you're old, it's filthy. You know what I mean? It separates you from the pack. But when you're young, that's all that matters to you. That piece where you don't feel accepted and I want to know why my hair like that, right? Why my eyes don't look like their eyes. And I had a big struggle with that. And that compounded as you start to grow up and in my circumstances of now I'm acting out because of the circumstances in my household and everything else going on. And it feels like society and schools and anybody in a position of authority get to shoveling you into the corner. You know what I mean? You get othered everywhere you go. Now you're a problem to be fixed. And now your messaging about what you can do and what you will do in life is so consistent. And it's and you keep hearing that you ain't gonna be shit and all this other stuff. And so that type of messaging creates an individual where I have a lot of anger, I have a lot to prove, and the people where my acceptance lies and my love lies meant everything to me. And that's what really was my separation, was that loyalty piece. I've always been loyal. Yeah. And that's why I kind of when I look at the youth now, when you see people who are showing up in a way that other people don't appreciate, and I see that asset-based approach. I see because those are good qualities in me. Yeah. That willingness to go that extra mile, that loyalty piece, those are all great qualities I had. Now, granted, they bled out different because of my lived experience, but those are really good qualities if they were cultivated in the way that they needed to be cultivated, and I would have been shown care like I really needed. Because at the end of the day, that's all I needed.
It's mind-blowing to hear that you say that. All you needed was somebody to care, right? I remember when I was in the belly of the beast, and I had a cellmate by the name of Poonie. I know you know old school Poonie, right? And Poonie's old school. He's from Compton, California, from the hub city, right? And I remember when he got a chance to get to know me. We would, we used to have good conversations and dialogue about life, and he's seen how I moved, and as I matured through the process of just, like you, just growing up in that environment. We're going to get to that part as well. But I remember one day, we in there making these makeshift burritos, Poonie was pretty much an expert around those burritos, man. Poonie knew what he could put his foot in them, you know what I'm saying? I get all the ingredients and all the product and be like, bro, blow it up, do what you do, right? So we in there and we're making burritos. And I remember Poonie looking at me, man, and he was like, man, looked over at me after licking his fingers. He said, man, you know what, man, you was a good dude, man. You was a good youngster, man. And he said, man, you know what? Most of all you youngsters is really good. Yeah. So people just got to take the time to get to know you, to invest in you. And you know what he said to me? He said something to me that stayed with me to this very day. He said, most of you guys are only a hug away from a homicide. And you just reiterated that if people would have only cared hard enough, long enough, and continuously in a manner that showed a level of consistent compassion, things would have changed out differently before you, because you already said you got all these wonderful qualities, these unique uptick skill sets of loyalty and a vastness of possibility and potential. And if somebody were able to see that kind of investment instead of, like you said, shoveling and pushing you into this corner where you was othered and seen as a problem that needed to be fixed. So kind of moving into, now that you've got this moniker, No Brains, running around in Tacoma, and you was kind of like, and I know your story, so I want to share with the viewing audience, you was like one of the first wave of individuals who picked up, a certain subculture group that went through Tacoma, right?
Absolutely.
And it wasn't the Bloods, it wasn't the Crips. If people want to know, it was Black Gangster Disciple. We're going to keep it 100. That's one thing we're going to do. We're going to keep it 100 on this show, right? And so you was part of that first wave, right? So you also, when you was talking about having these differences in your ethnicity and not wanting to be othered, you also had this complexity of, now you're kind of like shifting into this new mantra of something that needs to be established. It was established in other places, but it wasn't established in the place of where you was coming up. They had the Hilltops, they already had the East Side, Paul Rules, and, the OLBs and all these different subcultural relationship entities. But then here you are on the front lines pushing this different, unique experience, right? So that ushered you into almost a sense of the limelight for this subgroup culture, and you became a name, for the lack of a better term, a household name or whatever. And we always talk about is we love the limelight, right? Until it turns into what? The spotlight, right? Everybody loves the limelight until it turns into the spotlight. Absolutely. So we're gonna make the transition of, here you are, You transition into being no brains, and you're in the limelight. Now you're in the spotlight. You found yourself incarcerated. What year was it?
1994.
How old were you in 1994?
16.
And how long were you sentenced to serve?
60 years.
60 years.
Yeah.
You were 16 in 1994.
Absolutely.
In 1994, it is 2020.
Right.
And you were given 60 years.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I know God bless those who are not here, right? And I'm thinking about the brother Nipsey. Nipsey's a genius, a force to be reckoned with. Even in his demise, man, we're learning a lot from this brother. But he was from a neighborhood called Rolling 60s. Yeah. And I'm sure he loved his neighborhood dearly, right? Because I remember him talking about building from ground zero in his neighborhood.
Right.
But I'm sure, I'm honest here because I know the experience to some degree. But if he, as somebody who loved the number 60, was sentenced to 60 years, I'm sure that'd probably be the first time he would have hated that number.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest, right?
That's real.
And so with you being sentenced to 60 years, how did that feel at 16? What was the impact of that?
I think the irony of I did 20 something years trying to not feel the impact of it, right? But I can talk about that though. So the impact was crazy. I'm a 16-year-old kid. I'm a child, right? And there's this numbing, like you're numb, like you don't understand. I mean, it was crazy when they were saying the months, because you know about being sentenced. They don't say 60 years. What they say is 200 and something months, such and such 100 months, ran consecutive and all this other stuff, right? And so I had to ask my lawyer, like, how much time is that? He just wrote 60 on a piece of paper and slid it to me. And I'm like, what? Right? I couldn't fathom the number. And from that point, like, I mean, through the whole experience, I was numb. You know, there's something numbing when you have somebody in this culture that you see has power, which is a judge, and he's telling you you're what's wrong with society. That society is a better place without you in it, right? And there's something about that moment where they're taking this opportunity to cut you down and kick you down. They already gave you forever, right? But really just chastise you and let you know how you're the problem and how life is better. And to speak to the other earlier point, when that consistent messaging, so that was just like, that was always my messaging. That was just the explanation point. You know what I mean? So I've always gotten that message my whole life. So when that happened, that was just like an explanation point, maybe 2 or 3 of them. Maybe 60 of them, really. Let's be real. And so I was numb, and I had some serious decisions to make. And the reality was, there was this old school cat that was in the county with me, and they love to indoctrinate a cat on the way to the pen. Yeah. And he told me, he said, "Listen, you have a choice." You know what I mean? He said, "That's a long time." And he said, "You have a choice." He said, "You can either be the wolf or be the sheep." He said, "The wolf get respected, sheep get eaten." Right? So choose wisely, right? And that reverberated in my brain as a kid. And granted, I was already living a lifestyle that kind of prepped me for what was gonna happen, except in the penitentiary, I like to think about it, it's like on steroids. But it's the same circumstances. It's like conditioning. It's like basic training. And then that's the actual war, right? And so I've been prepared for this. And so I understood how to navigate these environments. And I think what was tough for me was they already didn't see my humanity, but was giving up my humanity and thinking that I had to in order to survive in this space. And so a part of my process was I cut the world out. Real talk. I stopped because it hurt too much to be reminded of what you left, right? And even my wife now, but she was my girlfriend at the time, I broke it off. And I broke it off because, to be honest, she made me soft. That's how I used to feel. You know what I mean? There was always this other part to me where you didn't have to put on with this toxic masculinity. You didn't have to put on this armor and this mask on to navigate into these negative spaces. And I didn't had to put that on with her. But I didn't feel like, I had this defeatist attitude. Yeah. Like the reality is I had to tuck that, because I felt like where I had to go is I had to be that wolf. Right. And it came out when it's all said and done. That's what I did. I had to perform in a way where every situation and circumstance was life or death. Right. Somebody bumping me and me not doing something when I was in my time was that the way it weighed on me was like, listen, if I let him do this, I'm going to have to let them do this for the rest of my life. And so every situation was just exaggerated. And I know individuals that did time with me remember that, right? There was always this unpredictability, always this 0 to 60. And to them, it seemed like I was snapping. But the reality was, it was the weight of my circumstances on every moment. Every time I stepped out to cell, there was this weight that I carried. And it manifested in a way that kept me in the hole, kept me fighting, kept me with assaults. And so that's how I try to navigate that. You try to punch it out. You try to defeat the circumstances with the only thing that you know, right? And that's how I navigated. I really just started to self-destruct and go further in my depression and that's what it was. It was depression. I might have had a slick word for it back then, you know what I mean? And talk about how we don't give a fuck. It is what it is, and I'm with it, and I love it. But the reality is, if I'm being honest, and I have nothing left but to be honest, at this point in time in my life, the reality was, man, I was depressed, right? And I gave up. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until wifey came back a few years later, years later, and she came back that gave me glimpses again. I got glimpses of the streets. You know what I mean? Because I was really starting to burrow down. Like that was, some people don't realize how being institutionalized, we looked at that like it's a bad thing. But when you have all day, that is the safest thing on the planet. You don't have to hold these considerations for what's happening on the streets, who can't pay their bill, who's going through it, who's arguing, who's fighting, and who's sick. You don't have to hold these considerations. Life seems a little bit more bearable. And when you have those circumstances, that's all you're looking for is a little bit more bearable. And so that's how I dealt with it. I burrowed down. I started melting. That really hardened in me how I understand that healing comes in community. It wasn't until I met other brothers that was empowered, you know what I mean? But before that, before we were even empowered though, but before when we was knee deep in the BS, you know what I'm saying? Our bonds were real. You know what I mean? And we burrowed down together. And to be able to have that type of care and consideration for, fellow brothers in the struggle with you, you know what I mean? Help carry you through it. And when those same brothers of the struggle start to get empowered, and it gives you permission to get empowered. And that's what it really took for me. It took a whole village to get me. There's a whole lot of different situations and circumstances of people that I met. I could really reflect back to conversations with 8 Ball when I was in there, and I was in it. Like they couldn't tell me nothing. They thought they couldn't tell me nothing. But the reality is he was planting seeds. And what he didn't realize was happening in my brain is when he would give me a jewel, I would digest it, I would feel it, and then reality would hit. How does that match up with me doing 60 years in the penitentiary?
Wow.
Right? I can't fathom what does that look like in these situations when dude comes off the chain and he done killed my partner. What does that look like when some stuff need to be handled and I don't handle it? Right. And what he didn't realize, if he could have peeked inside my brain and seen what he was really going up against, you know what I'm saying? He probably would have felt differently. I mean, at the time, you know what I mean? He was probably like, this guy don't listen. This guy's hard. And I had something real ignorant from here too.
And you're speaking of somebody who actually was serving a life sentence themselves, right? With the blessings of the Most High. He's out now as well.
Absolutely.
And you talked about this thing about consistent messaging. It made me think about a lack of consistent compassion, which Big P Dog, props to Big Bro.
That's my guy.
He's out after 28 years. But when you talked about the consistent messaging, who were you receiving these messages from mainly, and who were you hearing them from more so than others?
Now you talking about the consistent messaging, the negative messaging?
Yes.
Well, everywhere it felt like. I mean, you heard from your family, you hear from every authoritative figure, every teacher. See, because I don't think what happened in retrospect, as I really am able to digest it, what I'm realizing is at the time, a lot of them, like especially like say your family, they don't have ill content, right? They got their own trauma that they're dealing with, and in their brain, they're trying to deal with the circumstances they can in the best way that they can. And what that looks like sometimes is horrible messaging. So by them lowering the bar for me, because maybe they really believe, like, listen, this is like I'm a problem to be handled. You know what I mean? To them, it might seem compassionate. Like, why are you expecting so much out of somebody that doesn't want to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to them, it might seem compassionate. To me, it seems, it reinforces like, you know what? Maybe I ain't shit.
Yeah.
And so that's where it came from. It came from close. You know what I mean? And to add on insult to injury, it comes from everywhere else too. When you're in school, I'm being handled. You know what I mean? They don't see my skills and my talents and my gifts. I mean, there was one teacher throughout the years, and she see me. I'm talking. I'm slick with it. I'm joking. I'm laughing. I'm very relational. And I remember she had everybody do an assignment, and she let me do it with somebody else. The two people that did the most talking.
Yeah.
We did great.
Yeah.
Right? Because she saw it. She was like, listen, like, he's smart. He just, you know what I mean? He this is how he work. This is how he operate. He loves to talk. You know what I mean? He loves to communicate. And if I can put him in a position to have to communicate to do the work, he's going to do well. And I did. Right? And that was 1 out of a million, you know what I'm saying, in one grade, at one time, in one class, that somebody was able to see my humanity and see that maybe I wasn't a problem. Maybe that there was maybe that these were just, that these were my gifts that were bleeding out in a certain way because of my experiences, my lived experiences.
So yeah, when you talked about the consistent messaging, that's very critical and is crucial to any person's development. Even in a relationship, you can be developed to a certain point. A consistent messaging actually matters, right?
Right.
And when I'm hearing from you, and the reason why I like the fact that you broke it down, because it emphasizes a point that's playing out in my head, and also what I was able to pick up in our last interviewee last week with Leonte, that what adults do really matters.
Yes.
The way that they interact and how they build or don't build up relationships, it really matters. So when adults are trying to situationally blame problems on young folks,
right,
they really have to look at themselves, right? Stop looking out the window and start looking in the mirror, right? Take an opportunity to really look at yourself and see that you are creating X, Y, and Z, right? So I think that's very critical and crucial for the listening and viewing audience to really just take a bite out of that information, that consistent message. And so here you are, went through this transition of having all of these things heaped upon you that kind of spit out this no brains guy, right? Because of all of your charisma and all of the wonderful attributes that you still possess till this day, were not being utilized in a way that could have profited yourself and others, right? They're very profitable skill sets. And people just didn't see the value in it because of all different types of reasons. And so here you now become no brains. You're inside the system.
Right.
You're given 60 years to serve. And I'm just being honest with you. When I was sitting up here, I know your story, bro. And I'm sitting up here listening to you. And there's a part of my heart that just want to just cry because I'm thinking about Who took the time to cry for that little child that was not given an opportunity to have a childhood, that was denied a childhood?
That's real.
Like, like, I'm not gonna lie to you, bro. I went in at 13, and it hit me one day as I was driving down a freeway, literally like a few years ago. Like, they sent a 13-year-old kid to prison. And it was like I had an out-of-body experience. Like, it felt like I was speaking about somebody else, because I really am. Yeah. I'm a totally different person. And I really cried for that little boy who was denied access to a childhood. Yeah. Right? And because we're always doing this work and we're always on vanguard, we don't really give ourselves an opportunity to really cry for that little boy. And so I want to ask you the question, how much time did you serve? And when did it finally click for you to make that transformation? You made a transition into certain aspects because of the world heaped these things on you. But when did how much time did you serve? And when did it click when you started making that transition?
Absolutely. Well, no, I appreciate that, brother. So I did 24 years. I ended up doing about 24 years when it was all said and done. And it's not about clicking, as you know, it's not about clicking. I used to say verbiage like, I changed, right? I turned the corner, and I used to say that. And I don't anymore, because I don't believe people change. I believe they heal. I didn't need to change, because the change is to imply like something was wrong with me before.
Correct.
You know what I mean? There wasn't nothing wrong with me. What was wrong was that I had trauma that was bleeding out. And then there was nobody there to put first aid on it. That was the problem. I wasn't the problem per se, right? But we live in a society where you feel compelled to have to demonize the old you in order to reassure people that the new you isn't the old you, right? And they create this dynamic in our society where I got to demonize that. And that's why it's easier for me to advocate for somebody else's 16-year-old than it was for me to advocate for my own self at 16. Because I knew in spaces you didn't want to hear that. Yeah. Because if you heard me really talking about the humanity of that 16-year-old, to you it might seem like I'm not holding myself accountable, right? And so I really want to get to your question about what happened. And I'm going to talk about my healing journey, right? So I really want to talk about my healing journey. And what happened was you start to get all these seeds planted from all these good brothers, like through the years, man. There's all these good brothers through the years that was able to see past the mask I had on and was able to see like, man, listen, man, just like Poonie told you, man, you a good dude, man. You feel what I'm saying? And able to see in these moments and want to give you these jewels. They want to invest in you because you know what? They believe you're worth the investment. You know what I mean? Even if in 5 minutes you're not going to take advantage of these jewels that you're giving you, they still in the moment believe that, you know what? Here, bro. And so, because when I was able to start to heal, I plugged into every jewel that was ever given to me. Every jewel that ever given to me, that a brother maybe in passing or whatever the case was able, and it resonated with me, but I didn't have the courage in the moment, or I didn't have the ability in the moment because I was still too wounded. You know what I mean? And so that's what started happening. Stuff started also happening was there was this point in time where, because I was loyal, like I'm really loyal. Like I would have traded it all and did trade it all. You know what I mean? And when guys started showing up different, right? Because when we going in there and we're young, they sell us this brochure, this old brochure about how it's supposed to be. Like, these is the rules. This is how you move, and you never let this happen, and you never let your partner, you know what I'm saying, when he needs you, and you never turn down a fade, and when it comes, all these, the rule book, right? And you start to see these guys who are preaching this stuff, and they're not living it.
Yeah.
They got, right? Because I'm in there, and I did 24 years, and I probably did like 8, 9 of it in the hole, right? just going back. I'm back and back and back. I keep going back, and I'm coming back out, such and such told on the homie, and he's in here for killing the homie, and I'm in motion, right? And there was a moment on one of my last programs, right? I just got out of IMU, bro. Just got out. I just did a year. You know what I mean? I got out of IMU, and there was this guy that came on the main line for killing the homie, right? And he was out there. That hurt my heart. Yeah. That all these guys out there, some of these guys I respected, man, and had real love for, and I was like, so that hurt my heart. And so when I got out of IMU that time, you know, I assaulted him and got an assault on staff, came right back. I was out 3 hours, right? I was only out 3 hours. I went in and I went right back, and I really felt the disregard for me. And the disregard. And there was some of my guys too, you know what I'm saying? Some of my guys was at me. Jay and a couple of the guys was in hole with me, like, and they really was talking about, bro, they don't appreciate how some people play the back because they know I'm gonna handle it, right? And so that was a moment that gave me a space to be able to make a different decision, right? And so I felt a way about that. That hurt, right? And so that gave me space. And I was always, and I became an avid reader. I had to lace myself up. They wouldn't let me take any educational classes because I had too much time. Think about that, right? Yeah. I couldn't get educated because they felt like they'd be wasting the resource on somebody that wasn't going home. Right? So I had to self-educate myself, right?
So once again, consistent messaging.
Consistent messaging, right? And you see how it shows up consistently. Like, that's the only consistency I had in my life. You know what I mean? People who had care and consideration came in spurts. Wow. But when it came to the negative messaging, that was the most consistent thing I had in my life, right?
That was the highlight.
That was the highlight. And so all this stuff is happening. I'm feeling away, and it is what it is. And then I get my mandate comes back. You know what her mandate is? That's your last appeal.
Yes.
That means it's over. That means if you had some fantasy of a technicality getting you out, because that's over. That's a wrap. And that hit me too. You know what I mean? It was what it was. I was in there and I was acting up and all this stuff. I'm not thinking about my circumstances like that. I'm not thinking about 60 years. You know what I mean? And then that was a wake-up call moment.
So when you got your mandate back, and as you explained, that means there's no more romance in the idea of a possibility that your circumstances could change in your favor.
Right.
It was over.
It was over.
You're not coming home.
No.
You was essentially sentenced to a technical death sentence just by virtue of time.
Yes.
Because you was not expected in terms of life expectancy for most folks is not to live past that term.
Absolutely.
And so you were essentially sentenced to a death sentence.
Right.
At 16 years of age.
At 16.
And then you get your mandate. And your mandate says it's over. So the fantasy that you concocted,
right,
the ideas you had that you romanced of something of a technicality will give you an opportunity of having a favorable circumstance, just like a miraculous thing take place.
Right.
You get shot all the way down. All possibility.
Right.
All hope is gone. What did you do? And how did you get out?
Well, and so I think, I don't want to pretend like rock bottom did anything good for me. It doesn't.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Because I was real comfortable with rock bottoms, right? I had a whole lot of rock bottoms. And there was, you develop this kind of pain tolerance. You know what I mean? When you experience a lot of trauma. And so that doesn't wake you up to be like, you know what, I need it. But because you don't understand that consistent messaging, I'm doing it to myself now. You know what I mean? I'm keeping myself in place. Like, come on, nigga, what you gonna do? Wow. You know what I mean, right? And that's the self-talk, right? And so what happens is it's you start to get the right people in your life. Right brothers give you sidebars. You know what I'm saying? The right situations start to happen where baby girl came back. You know what I mean? And really, and she's probably the only person as far as back that time that really saw my humanity. Like, she always saw me. Like, even when I used to be on that, like, after I changed and stuff, like, she's the one that was consistently like, I don't know why you keep saying that. Like, you changed. Like, I've always seen you. Yeah. Like, this guy, right?
Beautiful.
For real.
That's beautiful.
And it is, right? And that's why I married her, right?
Mm-hmm. Come on.
Because she saw me. She saw me when I was 16 and I was no brains in the thick of it, right? I didn't see me and she saw me, right? And so there's a healing property of being seen. There's something healing about when somebody sees you and could hold your trauma in both hands, right? Wow. There's something healing about that. And then there was this couple that came up inside the institution, and they just gave me empathy, right? Just gave me empathy, and made space for me. That's what it looked like. Just made space for me. Like, they were in there on, it was like a Christian organization, but they were like, they didn't talk the Bible or nothing. They just made space for me and befriended me and was writing me until I got out. Like, think about that, for like 16 years. You know what I mean? Like they was sending me pictures and of their vacations, and like they really was treating me like family. When it looked like that they couldn't come see me anymore because I went to a new institution, they stopped going in and they just came up. Wow. Right? So so what I'm saying is, and so there was this process, and there was this process where I had to forgive me too. That's the biggest piece. And so that's happening where I get taste of what empathy looks like. Wow. Right? And that's transformative in a sense where the world looks different. Because before, you justify bad behavior because you think the world is a bad and scary place. But when somebody shows you empathy, the world looks different. Wow. You know what I mean? And then my partner, good friend of mine, Wyatt, you remember, bro? Yeah. And bro got out, and he had a daughter, and he made me the goddad. And that was big for me, bro, because I didn't have no kids. Because I was in there at 16, I didn't have any kids. And they really made me the goddad, though. Now, you know how some people just do it, and, you know, he's the goddad. And it just is what it is. But, like, really, like they used to have me involved. And that was big for me because it makes you, there's a reframe that happens. You know what I mean? There's a reframe that happens, like, when you love this little girl, and the reality is you want to be of value to give to this little girl when she needs it, right? And there's another incentive. So there's more inspiration for me to be able to want to be the best version of myself. And so all of these things are starting to happen, and I'm starting to really grind, and I'm starting to help others and stuff like that. And we're trying to start classes because they won't let me take classes. No, I'm trying to start my own, right? And there's this healing component when it comes to giving back. And so I'm reaping the benefits of all these things. And there was this one, if there was any moment, there was a moment where I seen this bar that says, whatever you aspire to be, move as if you already had that. Yeah. Right? And I had to come to terms with the fact, like, I'm probably going to die in the penitentiary, right? And so my success had to be the process. Freedom couldn't be my goal. It had to be me being the best version of myself, had to be that now. And so I started to move like that. I reconfigured my day, and I moved as if I was out. I stayed productive for 8 hours. You know what I mean? I cultivated habits that are conducive to me being successful. And I'm reading The Law of Success, and I'm reading all The Secrets of a Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. I'm reading all these books, and I'm digesting all this information, which is pushing back to all the initial messaging I got. I've always, in retrospect, I've always been pretty sharp, right? But the messaging was that I was sharp as a marble, right? I always got that message. I wasn't smart. You know what I mean? That's because I can't memorize this information and spit it back to you in this test. You didn't think I was smart. But what I didn't realize is in my maturity is my comprehension level was high. Yes. You know what I mean? Yes. That's what makes you smart. Yes. I could piece things together in a way, you know what I mean, that's hard for you, even now as an adult, but me as a child. But So all that process, and then the juvenile research, the one that inevitably got me released in 2014, that juvenile research, I hammered through that, bro. And that gave me permission to forgive myself. Wow. Right? Because you can see the juvenile brain, and that's and I saw my thought process in the thought processes that they were talking about. I'm like, they're talking about me in that case. Yeah. You know what I mean? Circumstances were different, but the mindset was the same. And that gave me the room and space to really be like, listen, you're not a bad person because you did bad things. You feel what I'm saying? I was in my trauma, and what I need to do is heal if I want to show up better in the world. And so that's what I ended up doing. And that's how I had my healing journey that was the process of it. And by the grace of God, in 2014, they granted me release. And then upon my release, I've been hitting the ground running. It was in Brothers Like You. I remember the letter you wrote 2 years before I got out. You wrote me a real letter about really prepping me. You feel what I'm saying? Talking about the space and talking about how you how you were exploited when you first got released for your voice and for your power and for your talents and for your gifts. That sat with me when I got released. Remember, I was with you at the Urban League.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you was able to give me framing that really benefited me, you know what I'm saying, as I navigate this world now that I'm 40, I'm just turned 43.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so,
man, it's powerful, man. That's a powerful story, brother, because it's real, it's raw. And you talk about this process, man. I was there with you, I'm like literally I'm there with you as you're telling the story. And I was literally there with you as well, in aspects of that story. And I know what your journey looked like, and I know what your transformation looked like. Because we know that the penal system is set up entirely for punishment.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad you was able to break down that it's healthy to forgive oneself. And we know when you're incarcerated, you only have one of two choices. That's you change the environment into either a womb or a tomb, a place of development or a place of decay. And I'm glad that you did not turn that cell into a coffin, right? You turned that cell into a classroom. And just by happenstance, when you turn the cell into a classroom, the institution becomes a university. So you was in a perpetual state of learning. And I'm glad you didn't give up on yourself. And so, man, bro, my heart goes out. I wish nothing but the best, the continued success. Absolutely. As we mentioned earlier, you are the executive director for Freedom Project. Can you give us a little bit about what you're doing at Freedom Project and how folks can get in contact with you?
Absolutely. And so at the Freedom Project, what I really appreciate the work that we're doing, because we do it from a community-centered perspective. And I think that's the only perspective. As you might have heard in my story, it was community that allowed for me to heal and become and show up as the guy that I am today. And so what we're doing is we as of now, we're doing a lot of work with the Credible Allies Project, supporting youth from 18 to 24, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx, supporting them and giving them that shoulder-to-shoulder support and the resources necessary so that they can show up in the way that they need to show up. It's not about just resources. It's about that peer support. You know what I mean? These things are coming from our stories and our lived experience of understanding of how do we support somebody that's bleeding out in their trauma. And I want to be there and be able to support my community in the way that it has supported me. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. At the end of the day, I believe that it's a movement. It's a movement to really support the community. And so with that being said, if you want to plug in, please plug in, reach out. You can get at it's freedomprojectwa.org. Go online, reach out to me in any which way that you would love to participate or add value to the movement. Please come, because your voice matters and it has a place. And if anything that I have could make space for you to show up in the way that you want to show up, that's what I want to do.
So how can they reach you? What's your information?
You can reach me at david@freedomprojectwa.org. Or like I said, go online and check us out, freedomprojectwa.org.
Man, I appreciate that, bro. A lot of other different things you're doing, hiring folks out of the community, Absolutely. Hiring folks with a, impact and live experience.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I like to tell people or ask people is do you know when you're the shit?
Do I know when I'm the shit?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do I?
When you have that feeling when everything is good, you look good, you smell good, you're dressing good, all the cylinders are clicking, there's no clash, You know, that moment when you know you're the shit.
Okay.
Most of the time it comes from, in terms of an explanation or a response to that question, it's come from a singular lens.
Right.
And it's okay because the question was put in a singular. When do you know when you're the shit? But I'm going to be honest with you. You know you're the shit when everybody around you is fly.
Absolutely.
You know, that might go over the head, the viewing audience. It might go over your head, but it came from the heart. You know you the shit when everybody around you was fly. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing, David Heppard at Freedom Project. You know, doing the wonderful work on self and now being able to extend and give that back to others. I've seen an emotion on the inside and I'm definitely a part of it and seeing an emotion here where it definitely counts as well. And you are definitely the shit because everybody around you is fly. You're giving back to those who are deserving of those opportunities and you're loving on the community in a way that it needs to be loved on with a consistent compassion, with care and a dedication that's never been seen before until those who have been impacted, who can show up in a way that understands when I show up in space, I'm bringing my medicine bag with me because there's things in here that I've used that has been healing and I know that others may be able to use it. And I'm encouraging other people to, when they show up in space, to also bring their medicine bag because I might be able to use something that they have as well. Absolutely. So thank you. This has been a wonderful episode, a good game alert, GGA. Once again, we're bringing it to you raw and authentic and it's coming from the streets because it's sponsored by the streets. Peace and love to everybody and have a wonderful day on purpose.